Welcome to the TOCA BackStage podcast. Join TOCA's Executive Director, Chris Wolf, in conversations with the artists and people behind the scenes of the Torrance Cultural Arts Foundation's performances and events.
Hi, welcome to another edition of TOCA BackStage. This is Chris Wolf, the Executive Director of the Torrance Cultural Arts Foundation. Today, it was my pleasure to speak with Julie Baker from Californians for the Arts. There were a number of issues that local arts organizations were concerned about, so I thought I would ask the expert. Julie is an amazing individual taking on some big challenges for the arts in California, and she has a lot of great things to say. So please take a listen and enjoy. So I'm honored and pleased and tickled pink to have Julie Baker here from Californians for the Arts. Julie, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're extraordinarily busy right now with everything that's going on, but I found it really important that I have a chat with you because there's a lot of nonprofits in Torrance in the South Bay who were sort of hit with AB5 and are completely at a loss of how to deal with it. So can you just give a short summary of what AB5 is and how it affects nonprofit arts organizations?
Sure. AB5, well, first of all, thanks for having me, and it's great to be here. AB5 was a legislation that was, it became law January 1st of 2020, and it basically codified the dynamics decision, which changed how people need to determine if someone's an independent contractor or an employee, and basically made it more difficult to hire people as independent contractors, and the default being that if you're not sure, that person is an employee. And in the case of nonprofit arts organizations, it changed the way that it was determined to 3-point test. Before that, the Borrello decision, which is what has been the decision you should have been looking at for the last 20 plus years, that had more like a 12-point factor test. This tried to just bring it down to 3 points. The most challenging point, and they call it the ABC test, if you've heard people refer to that. The most challenging one is the B factor. And the B factor is where...
Yeah, I told you she was busy.
I know, texts and phone calls and everything else. Anyway, so the B factor said that basically if you are in the same line of business as the organization or company you're working for, if you provide similar services to their core business, then you have to be an employee. So in the arts sector, that's really challenging, right? So if you're a venue and you're hiring someone to perform there, you can't necessarily say that's not your core business, right? Is to present the arts. Or let's say you hire teaching artists or you're doing a master class. Again, how do you determine if that is not part of your core business? The A factor had a lot to do around controls, which is similar to what the Borrello test was around. And the controls is really around, the manner and means in which you work. If you can determine that you are independently controlling that, saying, I know I get to determine how much I make. I have, I'm negotiating my own wage. When I show up, where I work, the tools in which I use to work, then you can justify that sounds more like you're independent. In addition, if you have a number of jobs that are similar, so in other words, you're not just providing that service to one company or organization. So that's, so that kind of gives you a broad sweep of what AB5 did, and so it made that 3-point decision is the primary factor, and so that you have to determine. There, however, based on the work that I run 2 organizations. One is Californians for the Arts, and that's a typical nonprofit organization, a C3, and then we also have California Arts Advocates, which is a C4, and we have a lobbyist in Sacramento who's texting me right now, and that is where we lobbied through California Arts Advocates to have an exemption in AB5 for the arts and sector. What we ended up getting in the language of AB5 is an exemption for fine artists under professional services. And the deal with that is that there was actually no definition of fine artists. So really that meant it was subject to interpretation. And Chris, I mean, I don't know, maybe 16, 18 different workshops with different employment lawyers each time. And everyone has a slightly different interpretation of AB5 because it hasn't been law long enough for there to be case law to look at it.
Right.
So really, for an arts nonprofit organization, I would suggest that number one, you look at it and say, can we determine if someone that we're hiring is a fine artist? And if you could figure out a way to fit into that definition. I think, for your board, ultimately, we've all run enough nonprofits to know, ultimately it's the board's decision on the amount of risk they're willing to take in terms of being, determining, that whether or not fine artist fits that definition. And also, how much risk do you think you're exposing your organization to being audited if you were to if they were to find out that somebody was misclassified. And there's a lot of fees for misclassification, particularly if it's determined that you misclassified a worker intentionally, right? So you don't ever want to intentionally misclassify someone. Now there are two bills that the same author, Lorena Gonzalez from San Diego, who's head of appropriations, has made to create further exemptions to AB5. So the thing about AB5 is that even if people say get rid of the whole law, there's still a Supreme Court decision that has changed the way you're supposed to determine if someone is an independent contractor or an employee. What AB5 did is that extended those benefits to workman's comp and other things, but it also said who's exempt. So that sort of revision of that law continues. And so there's two bills right now, AB 1850, and I think the other one is AB 2257. And you'll see some exemptions now for musicians. You'll see exemptions for some writers, like newspaper journalists, cartoonists, photographers. So it's starting to come where we're finding that there's continued exemption language. So I would say stay tuned and keep looking at it. And right now, of course, everything is about COVID and right. Surviving that. But yes, AB5 is still there.
So that's the other thing is, I mean, arts organizations, well, everybody, small businesses in general have been hit really hard with AB5 because there was this massive scramble to figure out, okay, who's an employee, who's an independent contractor. And then COVID hit and everybody's just like, well, it doesn't really matter now because there's so much other things to worry about. And I want to get to COVID, but the definition of fine artist, because it is so vague, is it safe to say, I mean, not that you wouldn't fight this in court, but
not giving you any legal advice.
Would it be safe to say that it's well, the definition is so broad that it's up to individuals to say whether they, in other words, if an artist came to me and said, I am a fine artist, would that then be an assumption on my part to say, okay, I can hire you as an independent contractor?
I mean, first of all, you have to make sure they check all the other boxes, right? The control factors, that they have multiple other clients that they serve in the same, similar services. I would make sure they have a business license, their own website. I mean, things that just sort of really make sure that you're also very important that you're in compliance with Borrello, number one, because even if you become exempt from AB5, you still go back to Borrello. It doesn't mean that they're automatically an independent contractor. So I think number one, would I just say, look at that decision and utilize that for sure. But I think, one of the things is that it is the employers, they're the ones who are liable. So in other words, even if somebody comes to you and says, I want to be an independent contractor, I'm totally happy being an independent contractor, let's just move forward as we've always done. Again, it's the determination of how much risk you feel like that's exposing your own organization. If you know going into it, they really don't satisfy either Borrello, well then for sure they have to be an employee, or you're you're not certain they satisfy the ABC test, that's really the determination you need to make. I would say that if you determine that it could fit into the fine artist category, that they check the boxes for Borello, that they have multiple, gigs that are similar, et cetera, then I would also suggest that they write the contract, that you don't write the contract. Because that is also showing that they are more in control of the situation, making sure that they are the ones determining, they're negotiating a rate, that sort of thing. So I think that there's things that you can look at in that way to make sure that you're also doing it in this potentially the safest way that you can. I would say that number one, if you can, talk to an employment lawyer and see if you can get some advice there as well.
Okay. So COVID. There's so many webinars and so many Zoom calls that we've all been on talking about, how it's safe to reopen. When are we going to reopen? What is it? And I hate this phrase, but what is the new normal going to be?
Yeah.
How, from your perspective, how do you see this all playing out? What do you see a light at the end of this tunnel?
Gosh, that's a very challenging question in on so many different personal and professional levels. But let's try to address it from the professional in terms of what does it look like for the arts and culture sector in California, which is primarily what we fight for, and to make sure that there's a voice for that in Sacramento and with lawmakers. I would say that one of the positive things that I've seen come out of it is that more people are willing to work together. I think that if we, oftentimes in the arts, we tend to silo. So even within our own disciplines, we silo. And it's not to say that you shouldn't have associations. Of course you should. There should be a Cal Presenters, and there should be symphony, organizations and museum organizations. And because we all need to learn from each other. But at the same time, we need to see ourselves as part of a whole ecosystem. And part of that ecosystem is also the entertainment industry. And the entertainment industry is extremely, can be quite powerful. And they're also shut down. So what we've seen is that there are a lot more people coming into advocacy, into lobbying, into recognition that they're going to need some subsidies, some support during this, as we knew we were the first to shut down. We're likely the last to reopen to full capacity. So what does that mean for us? It means that we can't earn revenue. And, the interesting thing for the arts sector is arts nonprofits has always been that if you had more earned revenue than contributed revenue, you were looked to as a healthy organization, right? Today, if you have more earned revenue and less contributed revenue, you're in much worse shape than, right? So that's a whole new paradigm for all of us to try to understand. So one hopeful piece is that I see us starting to speak to the entertainment sector more so, and recognition that we are part of what we have all talked about as the creative economy. I think also what's hopeful is a recognition, and one of the things that we've been working on is really trying to change the perception of what the arts do. And one of the things that happens, and we all know this, is that in the good times, the arts are there, they're funded, there's more money, people go, they spend it, et cetera, et cetera. And the public sector tends to put money towards it because the economy's doing well, and we see the multiplier and everything else. In the harder times, what we've seen often is that's when the arts get cut, and sometimes they get cut first, right? And so what we want to make sure is that we're not being redlined. And part of our messaging is around artists as second responders. And we see that the arts have really stepped up during this time period. Everybody has looked to musicians, playwrights, poets, actors, theatrical productions, these wonderful Zoom, sort of edited versions of people performing things from Hamilton or whatever else it may be, as a way to provide comfort and hope and inspiration and distraction and education for our children that are at home. And yet we don't always equate that with compensation. We don't always say that actually it deserves to be recognized as work. And so one of our real trying to shift the messaging around in going towards artists as second responders is this idea that artists and arts organizations that employ them and the cultural institutions that make up California are essential and are essential workers in small business and employment and in providing services that actually are helping people. And not just from a spiritual and soulfulness standpoint, but actually providing these sort of social safety net organizations. I think all of us start to pivot, right? Right now, it's maybe you can't deliver an arts program in the way that you normally have, but you're trying to figure out how to do it online and how to monetize and all those other things. But then look at your arts engagement programs. Who are you serving in those arts engagement programs, and how critical are they to maybe those youth that you've connected with, or the adults or the seniors or people in isolation? So how do we make the argument that now we're not just there for entertainment, and although entertainment's important, we're providing something that is really of critical value and of service, not only for our economy, but for reaching underserved, reaching these under-resourced, reaching these folks who are in marginalized communities. And the arts have always done that. And as we see the economy shifting and everything else that's been shifting, and we're going to be in a public health and mental health crisis for years to come, where can the arts, serve and play in this arena? And that's really something I think that is a shift that our sector is going to need to really put ourselves forward in sort of saying, we are here for that. We are part of that. We can help with homelessness issues. We can be preventative for children to keep them engaged so that they don't go into drugs and alcohol. I mean, all of the things that we know in the arts sector, we need to maybe now lead with that a little bit more. So we're seeing the hopefulness in terms of that. I think it's really important that the arts sector is at the table. And one of the frustrations that we have, even though we have a governor who absolutely supports the arts and has for the last 2 years put in money to the Arts Council's budget, the state arts agency's budget, he's now facing a huge economic crisis and public health crisis. We want to make sure that he looks to the arts sector and the culture sector, not just the entertainment, and that's important. For example, today he's doing a roundtable with film and TV people. That's great. But how about our arts and cultural institutions? I mean, some of them are huge in terms of their budgets, and we know, again, the multiplier impact in our communities, as well as the social service net features that we have. So we want to make sure we're at the table. So I think that's important as well, that we're doing in our advocacy is to bring that to the attention of the governor and to lawmakers, and saying we need to be a part of how the state recovers. We should be a part of that conversation.
And that's actually, first of all, that's amazing what you said. Thank you for that. And I do agree that the arts are, sort of the second responders. But then take, for example, I'm using a hypothetical. You have a city council who supports an organization or who has an overriding ability to support the arts organizations, but they're also facing a shortfall. Mm-hmm. And they have to sort of budget balance their budget. They're automatically the arts organizations are faced with a decision on their end. Are they going to look to fire and police, or are they going to cut the arts? Well, needless to say, the arts are, like you said, always the first thing on the chopping block. As arts organizations to local politicians, what steps can we take to say, hey, no, don't forget about us?
I think it's really important, again, to lead then with your arts engagement strategies. What are you doing in your communities that are actually supporting things that police and fire and first responders are doing? In other words, if you're working in a way that is like maybe you're working with juveniles, and maybe you're working within local juvenile justice, programs. Maybe you're working within your local prisons. Maybe you're working with students who are requiring, that are in Title I schools. Maybe, things that show that you are actually part of the solution in making sure that actually it's not going to the police and fire, right? Like, how do we show that we are helping in our communities in a much broader sense? And it's, again, I'm not saying that arts for art's sake isn't valuable. Of course it is. We need those voices. We need to reflect right now, probably more than ever, because this is so strange, these times where we're isolated and we're using videos to communicate, and we don't talk or, in person and spit on each other anymore. We're not allowed to. So what does that mean for humans, right? What does that mean for our future? What does that mean for our children? And I think we need artists to reflect on that. But at the same time, we also know how vital arts are to wellness and to mental health, right? Wellness as well. So I think showing that, using data to talk about arts in the intersection with public health, arts in the intersection with mental health, arts in the intersection of preventative measures to keep kids not going into juvenile halls, people, providing services. I think that's where you say, how can we work with our police departments? How can we work with our fire departments? How can we be of service in that way? How can we use our venues? If we're not able to open to full capacity, and those venues that we spend a lot of money on in some communities to make beautiful, how can we utilize them right now? How can we repurpose? And I think it's a proactive going to your cities and saying, we want to be of service. We are creative. I can't think of a sector that knows how to stretch a dollar better than the arts. Use us, put us at the table, put artists in your meetings, and have them, thinking about creative solutions. And it goes back now to a sort of like what happened in the 30s, right? In the WPA, and then in the 70s with CETA in terms of training and that sort of stuff. It's like, let's put artists to work. Let's put creatives to work. Let's put arts organizations to work. It might look different than what we're used to, but we're ones who know how to, when the show isn't going the way you thought it goes, we change it, right? We are in production. We are in, we are those folks. So I think that there's a role for us to play. So I think it might be really coming not with a hand out for money, but a hand to say, I'm here to help. And I think that is a different way to approach what's happening right now. We need to be perceived and illustrate how we are part of the solution, not just needing dollars. Because if you're right, those dollars are stretched. And if we don't get more federal funds, as Governor Newsom talked about, the state's going to have major, major issues. So I think that, it is, like I said, I think it's looking at it and saying, well, how can we, if we can't put on the show like we normally do, what can we do in the short term, and what do the long-term solutions need to look like for the arts to be integrated, not separated? And I think that that's really critical. Put us into a variety of departments, not just into one.
That I got to say, I'm personally feel very comfortable in the fact that you're in your position, because I know you from mostly from your time at the Center for the Arts and the World Fest, where you did amazing work. You're actually the only other presenter I know of that actually did a Dancing with the Stars event.
Yeah, that was great.
And I know you had time in New York in working in the visual arts. So knowing that the California for the Arts is sort of run by somebody who understands both visual and performing arts gives me sort of a sense of calm. So thank you for all your work.
Oh, that's my pleasure. I mean, I think, this is my passion. This is what I absolutely live for in terms of understanding the impact that we make. And I think that, it's really, really important right now, more than ever, and that's a phrase that's overused, more than ever, but we'll use it here, to really, and I'm going to use this phrase, which is raise our voices for the arts right now, and to really talk about what it is that you do for your communities. And if you can't talk about it, ask your partners to talk about it. Ask other people in other sectors to say, no, we need the arts in our community because of, and the economic piece is really critical, of course, and we've led with the creative economy, sort of campaign for years now. One of our challenges, I think, right now is that while we're shut down, and if we are truly the last to open, our economic impact is lessened right now. right? Like we can't actually be the thing. Like in the beginning, when we didn't recognize what it meant to be, let's say, a part of phase 4 in the state of California, which means that we need a vaccine, right? We need antibody tests. If we truly have to wait for that, and let's say that's truly, let's be hopeful for spring 2021, but let's say it's fall 2021, what does that mean for our sector in terms of economic devastation? So we can't really necessarily lead with, well, we'll be open and therefore the restaurants will open and the hotels will fill, because we're not open, right? That's a challenge for us. So that's where it's like we have to figure out, and it's not a figuring out because we do it already. We just haven't led with this argument. We know this as people in the arts, what we do for our communities. And it is so much more than just the economic argument. That's really critical and really important, but it's a lot more than that.
Yeah, and amen to that, because I know, like, just actually a couple months ago, I got a unsolicited email or voice Facebook message from a kid that I taught acting to when he was like 13, and it was, Chris, because of your classes, I am alive and not in jail and on drugs,
Exactly.
because he found his creative outlet. And it's stuff like that as artists and people who creative people, that's what we live for. But then when
That's right.
you go to a city council member and say the arts can save lives, they go, yeah, but so can the fire and the police, and it's like, I
Right.
see your point, but it's apples and oranges.
That's why we think that the second responders campaign actually makes a lot of sense, because they're right. First responders save lives. Second responders rebuild lives. We're not running into burning down buildings. We're not doing that. That's not our job. And we are super, super grateful for those first responders. But when they pull that person out of the burning building, and that person now has to rebuild their life and figure out how they're going to go on and have a voice and find their voice and find their purpose, that's when the arts come into play. And we know that. And that's why we show up for work every day. None of us, particularly in the arts and culture, small budget or even large budget nonprofit arts organizations, are there for the money. That's not why we went into this.
Yeah.
We went into this because we really believe that we transform lives and communities. And that's what we have to really make sure that we are out there talking about and sharing those impactful stories with data, certainly, and recognition that we are all of those things. We are small businesses, we are a part of the economy, we are critical to our communities, we are just transforming lives, and we need to be recognized for that and invested in. We've been systemically undercapitalized as an industry forever. Let's just be honest, right? We're always fighting for the funds. Our fight is even greater now. But we have to pivot. We have to look at it from a perspective that is completely new. This is nothing that we've ever seen before in terms of public health crisis, mental health crisis. We're going to have increased homelessness. We're going to have increased unemployment. So what can we do? Where can we be of service? And we all do it in our own communities. So now we just have to make sure that we're really articulating that and having our partners. And this, like I said, I think this is important. We can toot our own horn, and we should do it in a really clear way. But at the same time, it's helpful if you have your partners. So if you're doing programs like this, like you said, that person who wrote to you, maybe it's also, maybe the schools are stepping up for you. Maybe it's a homeless place that you've been interacting with, shelter or services. Maybe it is your local hospital that says, when I ran the center, as you mentioned here, we had support from our hospital, because the hospital recognized how critical the arts, we did a whole campaign, laughter is the best medicine. It's like, it truly is. We need this stuff,
Yeah.
But what we often do this thing, which is, this is the paradigm shift. We want to get away from starving artists. That is not what we want. We want thriving artists. We want to be recognized as essential, as workers, as people that have something to really offer, just as any other social service, or just as any other profession, and we do it with celebrity, but we don't do it with what maybe you call boots on the ground, right? The people who are doing the hard work in our communities. And so, it's a big idea. It's something that it's going to take all of us to work towards, but this is the time when we can do it, and we're going to have to do it because really we have no other choice. We are going to have to look for continued emergency aid for artists and people who and for arts organizations, whether that's local in your communities, whether it's with private or public. We'll continue to look for these opportunities, but we're definitely also going to have to figure out ways where we can be at the table with a wide variety of aspects of how they're going to revitalize and create wellness for the state of California. The arts and culture sector should absolutely be a part of that solution.
Um, amen to everything you just said.
Let's go to church. Let's go to the arts and culture church.
So if people want to learn more about AB50 and what's happening with COVID, they can check out Californians for the Arts?
Yeah, absolutely. We have, our website has updates there. We continue to do that. I would also encourage you to get on our email list, because I send out weekly reports and action alerts as well. And then also to follow us on social media, a lot of times Twitter, because it's, we have to be there. Facebook and Instagram are our social media channels. And so we're out there with those things as well. If you're interested in, becoming a part of sort of the campaign around artists as second responders, we have ways that you can also support on that and take that concept and bust it out within your own communities. So check us out. And our website's californiansforthearts.org. We are, like everyone else, a small nonprofit organization doing our best to serve the sector and to represent the voice in Sacramento and in DC as well.
Well, I have to say the California art sector is in good hands with you. I cannot thank you enough for your amazing work and also for your time today. You've been great.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. Great to quote unquote see you. Be safe, be well, everyone. And we'll get through this because we are the ones who know how to be super, super creative. So we'll do it.
Amen. Well, thanks again, Julie. We'll talk soon.
Okay, take care.